someone who is more important than you might even think. Because back in the day, Julian Assange is actually someone who helped us get the ability to buy and sell things online. Yeah, believe it or not, Julian Assange is actually responsible, partly anyway, for making that legal. You see, way back in the 80s and 90s, well, mostly the 80s, mid-80s specifically, there was a law which made it so that cryptography was, believe it or not, a armament, legally speaking. So shipping an armament overseas was, of course, a really big crime. This is thanks to laws from the Cold War and World War II, which made it illegal to ship anything that could have been seen as armament overseas without a proper license. So this meant that if you wanted to ship something overseas that was encrypted, that was a crime. Now, shipping and emailing were both basically the same thing in the eyes of the law. This meant that if you wanted to buy something securely from an offshore website, you couldn't. It was illegal. You could not do that legally. The U.S. government would and legally charge you, possibly with espionage, but most likely with illegal arms sales or arms dealing. But that was the case. But then came along a group of people called the cypherpunks, and they were an interesting group of people, so hard and made it so ridiculous for the U.S. government to deal with that it was made legal suddenly for cryptography to be sent overseas. What they did was they set up an email account that was in Iceland, I believe, and emails were sent with encryption, PGP encryption, to this offshore email account, which was essentially bombarding this email account with illegal arms, so to speak. That is legally what it was. But that's not even the ridiculous part. The ridiculous part is this was in the 80s. We're not even talking about some, far off time in the 70s or 60s. No, this is the 80s, where everyone should have been able to buy things online with no problem, but they weren't because of ridiculous laws on the side of the U.S. government. So Julian Assange is very much familiar with ridiculous laws in the U.S. government. One of the cypherpunks, by the way, was Julian Assange, and he wrote a book about it that was really good, and I would encourage you to check it out. It's just called Cypherpunks, Julian Assange wrote, and it's really, really amazing. Now Julian Assange is almost entirely associated with WikiLeaks, and we forget that he is responsible partly for making it legal for us to buy and sell things online. He is integral, or was anyway, to the creation of websites like eBay and Amazon simply for his activism work. He's been an activist basically from day one, and he's been a pretty good one. And, I don't know his politics, to be quite frank with you. And most people don't seem to. I don't know what Julian Assange's politics are, and it doesn't really matter if he's a Hillary supporter or a Trump supporter. It doesn't really matter, because there are two problems with what's happening with Julian Assange right now. Number one, he's not an American citizen, so charging him with crimes against the United States or treason, it doesn't work. Now, crimes against the United States, I can understand, but treason doesn't work because he's not an American. So he's an Australian citizen. He's currently in a Ecuadorian embassy in London. How international can you be, and how non-American can you be, too? He's not American by any stretch of the imagination. He's also being held, or wanted, I should say, for questioning, not even charges, but for questioning, after a rape case in Sweden, which very well may be a manufactured rape case, but I don't know. Things happen, and it very well could be that the charges are legit, but something points towards them not being legit at all, because they happen to pop up right around the time he started to do things very controversial with WikiLeaks, namely the leaked collateral murder videos, which showed, allegedly anyway, U.S. helicopters shooting journalists. Now, whether the copter pilots knew they were journalists or not, I don't know, but that's what it turned out to be. Reuters journalists were essentially murdered or killed anyway by American helicopters in this footage. And Assange leaked that. Now, Assange is not the person who obtained that information for the public. Assange is the person who leaked it on the internet. He and his website, WikiLeaks, essentially act as a proxy. They act as a go-between for the leaker and the public. Now, you might argue, well, WikiLeaks is responsible for everything that's on WikiLeaks, and that's not true. WikiLeaks is only responsible for the publishing of it. WikiLeaks does not seek out or obtain information to leak. WikiLeaks obtains information by donation only, anonymous sources, right? They don't go out and say, I want the next Edward Snowden to come forward today, or I've hired this guy to hack into the NSA. It doesn't work that way. Never has, never will. That's not how WikiLeaks works. And Julian Assange is now particularly being targeted because he's affecting a very important person. That person in this case is Hillary Clinton. He's affecting the U.S. election in ways that possibly leaks haven't since the Pentagon Papers. To be honest with you, the Pentagon Papers were probably the last time we had leaks of this magnitude come out. Namely, the Podesta emails have been very, very interesting in a lot of ways, and it may have put Julian Assange on a few, shall we say, watch lists or maybe even hit lists. It was being looked after, that's for sure. And something very scary just happened today to Julian Assange. Again, the person who is responsible for a lot of these leaks that have come out from WikiLeaks about the Clinton campaign, the Clinton emails. They've all been leaked by WikiLeaks. Now, they were leaked to WikiLeaks, and then WikiLeaks published them. This does not mean that WikiLeaks itself or Julian Assange himself hacked into Clinton's emails, because that's not how it works. How it works is WikiLeaks publishes the emails, and that's it. That's all it does. It publishes, and that's it. Julian Assange is currently being held in an Ecuadorian embassy, again, against his will. He's stuck there, essentially. He's not been kidnapped, and he's not necessarily being held there by armed guards, but he can't leave, because if he ever does, he'll be arrested immediately by London authorities or even American authorities acting on the behest of America. That would not be a very good thing for Julian Assange, because there are a lot of Americans, especially in power, who want him dead, possibly including Hillary Clinton, because there was an email she wrote that was leaked on WikiLeaks, funnily enough, that talked about, perhaps jokingly, sending a drone strike to kill Julian Assange. Now, I get joking about that kind of thing, especially if you're someone in power, but that's not exactly a tactful thing to do. On Ars Technica, it's announced that WikiLeaks announced via its Twitter account this morning that WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange's internet connection has been cut off, blaming a state party for the outage. Assange, who has been ensconced by the Ecuadorian embassy in London since he sought asylum there over 4 years ago to avoid extradition, has been detained in absentia by the Swedish government on suspicion of rape and other lesser charges. The announcement comes after the postponement of an interview of Assange by Swedish authorities at the Ecuadorian embassy by Ecuador's Attorney General's office. The interview, which was to take place today, has been pushed back by Ecuador until November the 17th, which is a month from today. WikiLeaks also announced that it had activated the appropriate contingency plans in response to the communications outage. That plan may be related to other posts made from the WikiLeaks account overnight, referring to 3 pre-commitments, one regarding the UK's Foreign and Commonwealth Office, or UK FOSS, one labeled John Kerry, and one labeled Ecuador. The posts included long alphanumeric strings, which may be hashes or keys. They're most likely hashes, MD5 hashes, which, how should I put this? An MD5 hash, or any file hash, is something that's generated with a file. And if you have a file that, say, is an image, and you generate a hash from that image file, that hash will now match with that image. And basically, now you have a way to make sure this is the real and true original image, which was intended to be released by the releaser. That's how you have a hash. It's essentially a key that only works with that image, which proves that it is the real one. If you change just one pixel in that image, the entire string changes. So the MD5 hashes will not match up. That's what Julian Assange seems to be doing. This is to prove veracity for these different files once they're released. So you can tell this one's been altered by the government, this one hasn't been altered by the government or Russian hackers or whatever group you want to blame. So this is an easy way to tell this is the real deal from Julian Assange, because he tweeted out the MD5 hash. So it's a good way of ensuring security. It's a good way to make sure government doesn't screw around with your files too, because if the key is different, well, people are going to know, put it that way. So Julian Assange may very well be in grave danger now, thanks to some of the thin ice he's been treading on. It's possible that he made arrangements for a dead man switch release of content, that if he were arrested or otherwise rendered incommunicado, according to Ars Technica, a cache of files held back would be released in an effort to damage the states and parties most likely involved in cutting him off from communication with WikiLeaks' staff. In addition to the recent leaks of emails from the Gmail account of John Podesta, a high-ranking official within Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign, and the publishing of files obtained from Democratic National Committee breach, WikiLeaks has issued bounties for leaks from the UK's Labour Party leadership. Both leaks have been alleged by U.S. officials to have been executed at the direction of the Russian government. Now, where the leaks came from doesn't particularly matter. I mean, it does from a national security standpoint, it does. But whether the Russians got it, whether the Cubans got it, or whether a lone wolf American got it, doesn't really matter in terms of the content. You know, we like to, especially the Democratic Party right now, likes to pretend that, well, if the Russians hacked into our accounts, that means the emails aren't real. And that's not at all true. And I don't know how they can even pretend that that's the truth, but they like to anyway. It's ridiculous. It's like, you know, the guy who got the Pentagon Papers, I forget his name now, shamefully, was a little bit of a leftist-leaning kind of guy. But that doesn't mean his papers on Nixon are any less true. You know, like if you had a Democrat who hacks into George W. Bush's computer and releases videos of him, you know, staging 9/11 or whatever, that doesn't mean the video is any less true. It just means the source is some Democrat or communist or whatever. You know, it doesn't really matter. If you can prove the files came from there, then it doesn't really matter. And the Democrats right now, the Democratic National Committee anyway, not Democrats as a whole necessarily, are on full-on damage control mode right now, because some of these videos and some of these emails, I should say, are really, really damaging in terms of content. For instance, there was one that was just being talked about on the news this morning, if you were watching. They're talking about the emails about different aides to the Clinton campaign accepting foreign money and not telling Clinton about it. Yeah. So they're accepting potentially millions of dollars. The number value wasn't listed as far as I know, of foreign aid from different donators from different countries without Clinton's knowledge. You know, she doesn't find out until way later. And they're joking about how, you know, media is going to attack them, but they say take the money and deal with the attacks. And that's a little bit dubious, to say the least. Now, you know, probably every campaign deals with stuff like this. It'll probably come out later that Trump's campaign has taken money from Russian sources. But again, that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of presidential campaigns, because Clinton's taking money from Saudi Arabia. So if you want to complain about, you know, Trump taking money from Russia, that's understandable. But if you're making that argument from the standpoint of someone who's rooting for Hillary, that's a little bit misguided, to say the least, because again, she's taking money from Saudi Arabia, which is probably worse than taking money from Russia, because at least Russia has some, you know, humanitarian track record, a little bit, whereas Saudi Arabia really doesn't. They have this odd idea that capital punishment is the solution for every problem. I found out the other day, actually, that that cutting off your hand is the best way to dissuade robbery. Huh? No idea. Isn't that interesting? So that's the state of things in Saudi Arabia and a few other Arabic countries as well. Saudi Arabia is not exactly known for being progressive, put it that way. Not at all. But yet, you know, Hillary, the champion of women's rights, is going to take money from the champion of executing women for not wearing a hijab. That sounds very progressive. Well, the Russian government funded news organization RT, which is operated by TV Novosti, published a report that RT's accounts in the United Kingdom, their bank accounts, had been blocked. That report included a redacted image of a letter from the Royal Bank of Scotland unit NatWest saying, "We have recently undertaken a review of your banking arrangements with us and reached the conclusion that we will no longer provide these facilities. You will therefore need to make banking arrangements outside of the Royal Bank of Scotland group." The letter said that accounts will be shut down by December. RT has broadcast a show by Assange in the past and has faced sanctions for violations of UK and European broadcast standards, particularly for its coverage of the shoot-down of Malaysia Airlines flight MH17. So things are not looking particularly good right now for Julian Assange, and things are not looking particularly good right now for the state of American politics in general. Because Americans right now, in terms of the election, are so easily swayed by personality and never minding the facts. You know, we like to just pretend that everything this person steps on is gold, and if you say otherwise, you must be some pinko commie. And that's not really how it works, but we like to pretend that anyway, because our guy is always right, or our girl is always right, or lady, excuse me, or our person is always right. It's ridiculous when you think about how we have gotten involved in the cult of personality on both sides. You know, people talk about Trump's cult of personality, and yeah, he definitely has one. You see it a lot. But what about Clinton? I mean, think about it. she's gotten so much attention from this cult of personality where you've got all these young college kids who think that, if you don't go for Hillary, you're some kind of, anti-gay Muslim hater who wants to see the world tumble apart. Never minding the leaks and the emails. And I'm not even saying Trump is necessarily the best option. He's definitely better than Clinton, though, that's for sure. But if you look at what Clinton's doing right now, it seems to be very much anti-freedom, at least, because it seems like anyone at all who cares about freedom in any regard would value the leaks that have come out of WikiLeaks and not joke about, killing Julian Assange. That seems a little bit drastic. And with the track record Hillary has with people dying around her, I'd say Assange should probably look out. And I'm not saying that in a threatening way. I'm saying it in a concerned way. I really want Assange to watch out for his own safety because things are not looking too good for him right now. And he's the kind of person we need in politics. Julian Assange is the kind of person we need in politics because he's just crazy enough to do the right thing. Most people are easily swayed by cash. Throw cash at someone and they'll do whatever you want for the most part, outside of maybe murdering their family. If you throw enough cash at someone, they'll vote the right way or they'll do what you want them to do in one way or another. Assange just doesn't care. He's got basically nothing to lose. He's in an Ecuadorian embassy. He's stuck there. He can't leave. The Swedes want to arrest him. Americans want to kill him. Britons want to arrest him as well. So the obvious option is to just let it all burn down. Do what you want to do. Do the right thing in Assange's mind. And that's what he has been doing for the last, 3 years while he's been held in captivity in Ecuador. And it's a sad state of affairs. It's a sad world we live in where there are real people, real politicians who want him dead. Think about Edward Snowden as well. Edward Snowden, one of the last, as far as I know, real patriotic people who leaks this information about what's really going on in the NSA, spying on Americans. But, he's an enemy combatant. We need to arrest him and have him executed. There are real American senators and representatives who wanted Edward Snowden dead, who wanted him assassinated. These are people who have been voted for by Americans. These are people who are in office because of the popular vote of Americans. If that's the state of affairs right now, if that's where we are right now in American politics, we deserve everything we get. Because if that's where we are right now, these are the people we're voting for, we may as well just give up. It's over. Except maybe not, because the solution is not what people think it is. You see, we keep going after this national solution. Oh, we need to vote in the right people. Oh, we need to get the right people in. That's not the solution. And it's never been the solution because it doesn't work. Time immemorial. We always look at people who said, oh, we'll vote for the right guy this time and things will work out well. That's only worked out well very few times in history. I mean, George Washington was voted for, and then most of the people after him, at least after Jefferson, did a exponentially worse job. So obviously voting the right guy in doesn't really work because there's so many factors involved. It's just not going to work out. You can't trust Republicans. You definitely can't trust Democrats, and you can only barely trust independents. And so who do you trust? Not elected officials anymore. That's for dang sure. Elected officials are not going to get jack done because they're working in their best interests. That's the thing. If you want people like Julian Assange to be free, don't put your hopes in these phony people who we call politicians. Because once you set foot in that state capitol, the only person I know of who's set foot in that state capitol and hasn't been corrupted to death is Justin Amash, who's a good guy, I think, and Ron Paul, of course. The ubiquitous Ron Paul. Everyone else who set foot in that state capitol, as far as I know, has been corrupted to heck and back. They're not going to save Julian Assange. They don't care about saving Julian Assange because he threatens status quo. Julian Assange is in real danger right now, and the only people who seem to care are people who are not necessarily aligned, we'll say, with the United States government in terms of trusting government, because I definitely don't. I don't know anyone who has half a brain cell who puts any trust whatsoever in federal government, because there's no reason to anymore. We're talking about the elections being all screwed up the way they are. I mean, think about it. If our only two options are Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, I think that says a lot more about the election process and who we're putting in there and the two-party system than it does about Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. They're just actors in a game. They're just players in a grand scheme. that's been going on for hundreds of years since the founding of the country. But look at the fact that we are forced to choose between these two people, not even those two people, just two people. We're forced to choose a leader from two groups of people who are diametrically opposed to the actual interest of real Americans. That doesn't seem very democratic to me. And we call ourselves a democracy. Well, we're not. We're a democratic republic, I know, but I've lost all faith in the election process. I've lost all faith in government in general. And I think the smartest thing to do is to lose faith, because then at least you're not going to be disappointed.
I'm blowing everything up. We're starting over. I'm doing a new show. I want guys who push it to the middle of the table and go over the top. Take a risk, fail miserably. I'm right, and I'm not wrong, and I'll never back down. Conflict works.